But yeah, I'd say the key players was the country and the 650 to 750,000 people that died. Or what, man, most of them, you think about those folks in the South, like all the soldiers, the people that came to the cause, to the South. Hell, they weren't slave owners, but they lived there and they believed what they believed in, what they grew up with. No different than the people that lived in the North. They believed in. Were they principal players? I think they were. Because if you go all the way back to our founding fathers, they were, especially in the North, there's 13 colonies. So the northern colonies, our founding fathers, they were concerned about slavery at that time. And they really wanted to do something about it. But they kind of shelved the issue. This is my opinion. They shelved the issue because they had more than enough problems to try to form the nation, to get the 13 colonies together. And if they'd have pushed the issue of slavery, they probably wouldn't have got it done and formed the country.
You did have great concerns on the part of the South about states' rights, about how to balance Congress so that the South wouldn't lose their power and therefore Congress would start passing anti-slavery legislation, because by then essentially all the northern states had banned slavery, and even though much of the country still was either on the fence about it or was certainly not avid or rabid abolitionists, the abolition movement was growing as blacks like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and so on gained their freedom and became voices that were being listened to, especially in the cities like Boston and Philadelphia and to some extent New York.
Well, I guess it would go back to the fact that the South wanted to break up the Union, and that started it. And then what was there was a couple forts and whatnot were attacked and taken over by the South, and I guess it just escalated from there. One thing led to another, and like West Point, for example, and you guys know what West Point is, it's your U.S. military academy, and all of the generals and that fought on both sides of the Civil War, the majority of them come out of West Point. They were all U.S. military, basically. And it evolved in there, and some of those guys, quite a few of them, resigned their commissions in the U.S. military, went with the secessionists. So there was, but I guess it still all boiled down to the fact that South Carolina and the southern states wanted to dissolve the partnership in a union.
Then, you had Kansas, Nebraska, huge controversy over, Missouri was a slave state, but what would Kansas and Nebraska be? Well, there was a border war and a almost all-out war between Missouri and Kansas, and Northerners moved into Kansas to try to make sure that it was an anti-slavery state, and Nebraska the same way, and so there was great tension building over that, and I think the final straw that made war inevitable was, of course, that four-way race in the 1860 election, where the Democrat Party was very split. The southern states ran a southern version of the Democrat Party. Douglas from Illinois led the northern Democrats, and because of the fragmented aspect of politics, Lincoln and the new Republican Party that had only been formed in 1856 is basically a Western expansion party. And what you probably studied some about, the reasons for the formation of the Republican Party from the old Whig and the other fractional parties, and Lincoln being the candidate and caught on and was elected. And once that happened, it was just a matter of time and events before the southern states, led by South Carolina, would secede. And of course, then I mentioned earlier that initial battle to capture Fort Sumter, and then it was a question of would the border states come in? Well, Tennessee did, but Missouri did not. And Missouri was so critical, and with troops coming in from Iowa and Illinois, the North was able to put enough force in place that they ensured Missouri would stay loyal to the Union. That crossroads state, it's just kind of hard to understand why and how important. And then in 1859, the John Brown raid, on the one hand, raised great concern in the South, even though it was put down fairly readily. It still raised that flag that freeing slaves or freed slaves could raise up in different parts of the South and become a threat to society and threat to the situation in the southern states.
Well, I think it all basically goes back to slavery. But I still think it was still that basic issue. And there was other things probably that revolved around it. Well, I think it all basically goes back to slavery. I don't know if there's other elements that led to it, but I still think it was still that basic issue. If you read a book about the Civil War or the attack on Pearl Harbor or whatever, those, unless it was absolutely documented, that person's writing was his opinion. Okay? That's his opinion of how it was, unless it's absolutely documented to be history. So what you do when you read all kinds of books, and a lot of the books that are actually documented are really tough to get through, especially for me. You know, I mean, they're dry and they're boring. Even though they've got all these good facts in them, they're tough to get through. So what you do, or what I do, is kind of interpret. Slavery was a bad thing. We should have never done that. That's true. But that doesn't alter the fact that it happened. It's real. It was real. So, but if you learn about history, you can take that and say, you know, this was not a good deal, not a good thing. But you can say, where do we go from here to try to correct that?